The room erupted in laughter when my son said, "My loser dad won't see a penny of the inheritance. He doesn't deserve it." For a second, I couldn't tell if the voice belonged to him. The chandelier light above the conference table was so harsh it turned every face into a caricature, every smile wider, every sneer sharper. But when I blinked, refocused, I saw Daniel, my own son, standing with one hand tucked casually in his pocket and the other wrapped around Olivia's waist like he'd just won something. His voice echoed against the polished wood walls of Patterson and Hughes' estate wall, 9th floor, a luxury conference room fit for royalty, and yet I sat at the far end like an intruder who had wandered in by mistake. My calloused hands rested awkwardly in my lap, the cuffs of my old blazer brushed against my wrists. Everyone else wore expensive fabric. I could almost hear it. Daniel grinned as the room buzzed. "Come on," he said, louder, milking the attention. "Let's get this over with. We all know Henry doesn't deserve anything. My mother and I suffered enough being raised by a failure." A couple of cousins gasped. Someone attempted to laugh into their hand. Olivia didn't bother hiding her reaction. She rolled her eyes dramatically. She leaned into him and whispered just loud enough, "Honestly, I'm shocked he even came." My grip tightened around the handle of my cane. No one noticed, except maybe attorney Richard Barnes at the head of the table. He was a quiet man, late 50s, stoic face, and he had been watching the room with a detached calm, as if he had learned to stand outside the chaos. He waited for the noise to settle, but Daniel wasn't done. "You know what my friends say?" Daniel continued, tapping his watch as if the reading of my brother's will was an inconvenience. "That I turned out successful despite him. And you know what? They're right." My chest tightened, like a rope was being pulled around it. I forced myself to sit still. At 72, I'd learned that reacting only fed the wolves. Richard finally spoke. "Mr. Carter," he said evenly, "I must ask everyone to be respectful. This is a legal proceeding." Daniel gave a mocking salute. "Sure, respect, whatever." Olivia giggled and kissed him on the cheek. For a moment it felt like the room leaned in on me, the lights too bright, the air too thin. My brother's name printed on the folder stacked on the table like a final judgment. Michael Carter, my big brother. A brilliant man, a visionary, the one who made it while I stayed behind. He built businesses, foundations, a reputation. And now here we are, dividing the remains of his life like crows picking through a feast. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat. Richard flipped open the will. "If everyone is ready, we'll begin." Paper rustled. Phones were silenced. A few chairs creaked as people leaned forward greedily. Daniel muttered under his breath, "Can't wait to see the look on his face when he walks out empty-handed." I heard every word, but I said nothing. Silence had become my only armor. I breathed in slowly, felt the faint scent of polished wood and someone's expensive perfume. My pulse thud in my ears. Richard started reading. "This is the last will and testament of Michael James Carter, signed and notarized on February 17th. The room settled into a tense stillness, anticipation mixed with greed. I could almost taste it. My brother's empire, investments, properties, accounts, numbers that looked unreal on paper, and all these people waited like hungry spectators. Daniel muttered to Olivia, "Watch, I bet he begged Uncle Michael for money one last time." Olivia laughed softly. He always looked like the type. My jaw clenched. "You have no idea what I've done for you, what I worked for, what I gave up." But I stayed silent. I breathed in slowly, felt the faint scent of polished wood and someone's expensive perfume. My pulse thud in my ears. Richard continued reading. Names, allocations, numbers. Some sighed with relief. Others sat up straighter when their share was bigger than expected. A few tried and failed to hide their disappointment. I stared at the polished wood beneath my hands, tracing the grain with my eyes so I wouldn't have to see the gloating faces. My cane shook slightly between my knees. My heart hammered so loudly I thought others might hear it. Then, without warning, Richard paused. He looked directly at me, not pitying, not condescending, just looking, like someone who understood something no one else did. Conversation died instantly. Daniel smirked. "Oh, this should be good." Richard cleared his throat and read the next line slowly, deliberately, as if it carried weight. And I felt the room lean toward me again, but this time for a different reason. The air shifted. Something unseen cracked, barely audible, like ice thawing before a flood. My breath caught. Every eye fell on me, and the reading continued. The silence in the conference room loosened something in my chest, and my mind slipped, not into panic, but into memory. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that lives in the bones. People think a man becomes who he is from one big moment, a breakthrough, a betrayal, a lucky break. But I became who I was through repetition, day after day, shift after shift. For 40 years I woke before the sun, packed the same metal lunchbox, and walked into a world of sparks and steel. I was a welder long before I owned the workshop. Blue flame, welding mask, the smell of hot iron, that was my language. I wore the evidence of every paycheck on my hands. Burns and calluses don't lie. My wife Laura used to run 2 fingers over my knuckles in the evenings. "You work too hard," she'd say. And I'd always answer, "I work for us." We never had much, but we had enough. A small house with peel and paint, cheap furniture but sturdy, a kitchen that always smelled like something warm. I wasn't chasing wealth, I just wanted us to be safe, wanted Daniel to grow up better than I did. When he was little, he didn't care about what we didn't have. He'd run into my arms when I came home, even if my clothes smelled like scorched metal. "Did you win today, Dad?" he used to ask. I remember laughing. "Win what?" "The day," he'd say, with that wide-open grin only kids have. "Did you win the day?" I used to look at Laura, and she'd smile, that soft, tired smile that said this is enough. But life has a way of testing what you think is steady. Laura got sick slowly, a cough, fatigue, then the diagnosis that started eating through our days like acid. We fought. We tried every treatment the doctors recommended. Insurance covered some, but not enough. So I dipped into my retirement savings, then the emergency fund, then the part of the workshop profit that I used to save for new machines. Daniel never knew. He was in college at the time, engineering degree, full scholarship. I didn't want him distracted, didn't want him worrying about bills when he should be shaping his future. Grace, my sister, called often during that year. She worked as a middle school teacher, thoughtful and careful with her words. "Henry, you can ask me for help. You don't have to break yourself alone," she said once, voice shaky. But I told her we'd be fine. I'd always been the one who held things together. She accepted it, but I could hear her crying after she hung up. Michael, my older brother, he didn't call often. Not because he didn't care, just because his life became busy in a way most people never experience. High-level deals, endless travel, magazine interviews, charity galas. But whenever we talked, he listened, genuinely. He never looked down on me. He once told me, "You build things with your hands, Henry. I build things with numbers. Don't think I'm the better one." A strange thing to hear from a billionaire. But he meant it. When Laura's condition worsened, the nights became the longest part of life. Machines beeping, hospital disinfectant burning my nose, the feeling that time itself had weight. There was one night, one I'll never forget. I was in the hospital corridor outside her room. The vending machine hummed behind me. The fluorescent lights buzzed like flies. Visiting hours technically ended 2 hours before, but no nurse had the heart to force me out. A nurse walked by and paused. "Still here?" I nodded. She shouldn't be alone. She put her hand on my shoulder, a small kindness in a cruel hallway. She said, "You're a good husband." Then she walked away. Daniel didn't visit. He always had a reason. Exams, internships, a group project. He'd say, "I'll come when things calm down." But things never did. A semester turned into a year, then 2. Laura passed on a Tuesday morning. Her hand felt feather light in mine. I walked into that same corridor and slid down the wall onto the cold tile floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. Daniel came home for the funeral. He hugged me stiffly and said, with a straight face, I didn't realize it was that serious. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I just looked at him and said, "She loved you every single day." And he nodded, not with heartbreak, but with discomfort, like he wanted the moment to end. After college, Daniel met Olivia, and it happened shamefully fast. The shift, the insecurity, the hunger for status, the comments about people who didn't make it. Suddenly our home embarrassed him. My job embarrassed him. My clothes, my truck. He'd say things like, "Dad, you'd fit in better if you tried harder," or "People won't take you seriously unless you look successful." We weren't speaking the same language anymore. Meanwhile, my workshop got quieter. A few clients retired, some moved to bigger companies. The recession didn't help. I kept the apron on the hook near the door, a habit, stained with years of work. Sometimes I'd pick it up and press it to my chest and smell the faint scent of metal. It felt like purpose before everything slipped. When I retired, there wasn't much money left. I never told Daniel why. Never told him that the reason there was no inheritance waiting for him was because we'd already spent it, keeping his mother alive as long as we could. I didn't want him to carry guilt. Maybe that was my mistake. In my modest living room, the one with peeling paint, mismatched furniture, a kitchen that always smelled like something warm, Laura's framed photo sits on the mantel. Some nights I polish it, just to feel useful. Once, not long ago, I whispered to it, "Did I do it wrong? Did I work all those years for nothing?" Of course, the photo never answered. Before the will reading today, I sat alone on my couch, smoothing invisible dust from the frame. Outside, kids rode bikes down the street, laughter trailing like an echo from a life I once lived. I remembered Daniel's small voice asking, "Did you win the day?" And I wondered, somewhere between grief and shame, whether I ever really did. That was the man who walked into the 9th floor conference room this morning. The man who sat quietly while his son mocked him. Not a victim, not a hero, just a man who tried and wasn't sure it mattered. And as Attorney Richard Barnes paused during the will reading and looked straight at me, the entire room leaned in. For the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not hope, not yet, just movement. The faint tremor before an earthquake. The shift didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, like rust. A comment here, a jab there. And before I realized it, Daniel treated me not like a father, but like an obstacle to the image he wanted to project. The first time I felt it clearly was at a Sunday barbecue at Grace's place. She had the kind of home that always felt warm. Cinnamon candles, soft throw blankets, gentle music playing low. But that day, the atmosphere cracked. Daniel stood near the patio table, holding a beer loosely between two fingers. Olivia perched beside him, her flawless smile frozen like she'd practiced it in a mirror. Grace tried to make conversation. "Henry's been helping the church with the new playground repairs. Isn't that wonderful?" Daniel didn't smile. He scoffed. "Dad fixing a swing set doesn't exactly scream legacy, does it?" Olivia laughed under her breath. Grace looked at me, mortified. "Daniel?" He cut her off. "No, I'm serious. Why does everyone pretend everything is great? We grew up poor. It sucked. Let's not act like Dad gave me some privileged childhood. He didn't." I opened my mouth, but the words that came out were small. "I tried my best." Daniel's response was immediate and sharp. "Yeah, well, your best didn't get me anything." The conversation died. Even the music seemed quieter. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I took a slow breath through my nose and changed the subject to the weather, like a coward. Or maybe, like someone who still hoped things could return to normal if he just stayed calm. But things kept getting worse. Every family gathering that followed became a test I was set up to fail at. At one dinner, Daniel rolled his eyes when I offered an opinion about his new business project. "You're not successful enough to give advice," he said, not joking, not softening. At Christmas, he said in front of the entire family, "If Mom hadn't died so early, maybe I'd have been raised by someone with ambition." And once, after I asked him how he'd been sleeping with all the stress he'd been under, he snapped, "You held me back my whole life. I deserved better parents." Each sentence was a cut. Olivia didn't stop him. She fed him. She'd sit close to him, nails tapping his arm, diamond bracelet tapping her wine glass. One evening she said casually, "You should age gracefully away from our life. We're trying to build something big. Don't take it personally." It was the most polite cruelty I'd ever heard. Still, I kept trying, telling myself he was stressed, that he was lost, that he would remember someday what love was. But the worst moment came at a restaurant Daniel picked, expensive enough that the menu didn't list prices. The lighting was dim, the clinking of silverware constant, jazz playing somewhere overhead. The three of us sat at a small table tucked near the window. When the bill came, I reached into my pocket and, out of habit, took out 2 coupons. I'd spent decades stretching every dollar. Saving was second nature. Daniel saw the coupons and burst out laughing, loud, sharp, theatrical. "Oh my God," he said, pushing his chair back dramatically. "He's using coupons in this place. You cannot be serious. This is embarrassing." People at nearby tables turned to look. Olivia folded her napkin neatly and said almost lovingly, "He's like a charity project. It's cute, honestly." Daniel wiped a tear from his eye from laughing so hard. "Dad, this restaurant costs more than your truck is worth. Let me handle it." I felt heat rise up my neck. The room squeezed around me, voices, eyes, clinking glasses. My coupons trembled between my fingers before I lowered them slowly. "Thank you," I said, quietly. It was all I could manage. Daniel leaned back, proudly, like he had rescued a child. When the check was paid and the plates cleared, Olivia went to the restroom. The moment she left, I finally found the courage to ask, "Why are you so angry at me?" He didn't hesitate. He'd been waiting to say it. "Because you gave me nothing to be proud of." My breath caught. I stared at him, searching for the boy who used to run into my arms, but he wasn't there. Only this man, fueled by resentment, defined by comparison. "I worked hard so you could have a better life," I whispered.
Yeah, and then I had to build myself from scratch. Nothing from you helped me get here. Not your money, not your name, not your influence, nothing." I nodded, because if I spoke, I knew something inside me would break open. Olivia returned, oblivious to the tension, and the moment disappeared like a match snuffed before the flame could catch. After that night, Daniel's arrogance became bolder. He bragged constantly during the estate pre-meetings before the official will reading. Relatives gathered to discuss logistics, dates, documentation, legal processes. Daniel would wave his hand dismissively and say, "I'm obviously the primary beneficiary. Uncle Michael always preferred me." And then, always loud enough for everyone to hear, "Dad will get crumbs, if anything." Olivia laughed, bracelet tapping the edge of her wine glass, the sound like a tiny hammer hitting a bell. I sat through every jab, every performance, my breath slow and controlled, counting them sometimes 1 through 10 so I wouldn't react. Diane, Michael's widow, hovered on the edges of these meetings, polite but uneasy, her eyes flicking toward me when Daniel went too far. But she never stepped in. Grace, meanwhile, held her hands tightly in her lap, anger simmering in her eyes, but silenced by family etiquette. Daniel and Olivia seemed to love the attention. Their insults bounced off the walls like entertainment, and the more people reacted, the worse they became. One evening at Grace's house again, Daniel raised a glass and declared, "A toast to finally stepping into the life we deserve, no more being tied down to the old generation's failures." Everyone froze. Grace whispered, "Daniel, enough." He grinned. "Oh, come on, don't pretend you don't know. Uncle Michael adored me. He actually believed I would become something." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, too calm. "He adored you because he believed you would be kind." Daniel's smile faltered for a briefest second. Then he laughed in my face. "Oh, please, you have no authority to talk about character. Look at you, retired too early because you couldn't keep up. No savings, no legacy, nothing." My fingers pressed against my cane, not shaking from rage, but from hurt. "I gave you love," I said. He leaned forward, eyes sharp as a blade. "I didn't need love. I needed a head start, and you didn't give me one." Silence swallowed the room. Even Olivia didn't smile. Grace stood abruptly and excused herself to the kitchen, eyes glistening. Some relatives looked at their shoes, others pretended to check their phones. Daniel sat back triumphantly. He didn't see what he had become. Or maybe he did, and liked it. In the weeks leading up to the will reading, he bragged even more boldly. At one pre-meeting, he said to a group of cousins, "Let's be honest, Uncle Michael respected intelligence and success. That's why the estate is obviously coming to me. Henry has no future left. I'm the one who'll grow the Carter name." I didn't respond. I simply gathered my papers and left quietly. Dignity was the only thing I had that Daniel couldn't take from me. Laughter bounced off the walls behind me as I walked out, Olivia's diamond bracelet tapping glass again and again like a drumbeat. And yet, despite all of it, I still woke up each morning wondering if I had failed him, wondering if something I did or didn't do created this version of him. But the day of the will reading, when Richard's gaze locked on mine and the room stalled mid-breath, something began to shift. The one thing Daniel never prepared for, the one variable he never considered, was that Michael might have seen me differently than Daniel did. And the rising conflict that brought us to that room was about to break open.
The night before the official will reading, I wasn't expecting anything. I'd made tea, turned off most of the lights, and sat in my living room polishing Maura's photo frame, like I always did when I felt the weight of the world pressing in. Then came the knock. Not loud,
just 2 steady taps. I reached the door slowly, cane tapping the floor, joints stiff from age and years of work. When I opened it, I found a courier holding a slim black parcel. "Delivery for Mr. Henry Carter," he said. I signed without thinking. The package was light, too light to be important, I thought. But something about it made my hands tense. My name, printed in bold letters across the envelope, looked deliberate. I sat at the kitchen table, turned on the small overhead light that buzzed faintly, and opened it. 3 items slid out: a sealed USB drive, a formal legal document stamped and notarized, and a handwritten letter. My breath hitched the moment I saw the handwriting. Michael's. For a long time, I didn't open it. I just stared. My brother's handwriting, looping letters, big spaces, pulled me back decades. I could almost hear his voice, almost smell the aftershave he always wore. I finally unfolded the letter. "Henry, if you're reading this, then time has done what it always does." I swallowed hard. My eyes skimmed ahead, not to rush, but because grief makes you chase answers. "I have watched you live a life most people can't understand. You built your dignity with your hands, one finished job at a time. You stayed when things were hard. You carried weight quietly. Not because you wanted praise, but because you loved." I stopped, exhaled. My eyes burned. The next lines were gentle, painfully gentle. "When Laura got sick, I saw how you suffered. I saw the nights you stayed at the hospital, even when no one else came. I saw how tired you became. And I saw how Daniel spoke to you. I saw the contempt in him." My chest tightened. He knew. He wasn't blind to it. I said nothing then because I believed he might change. But instead he magnified every cruelty. He mocked your sacrifices. I believe he is ashamed of humility, and therefore ashamed of you. I set the letter down. My fingers trembled. That line hit deeper than any insult Daniel ever gave me. It took me a full minute to gather myself before I continued. "I know how the world sees success, money, influence, titles. I have all of those things. You never did. But you had something I never managed to build, a good soul. And I have spent my life realizing that character is rarer than wealth." I blinked rapidly, fighting moisture. "The long ago, I planned to divide my estate among family. But over the last years, I discovered that kindness deserves security, and cruelty deserves consequence." I whispered into the empty room. "Michael, what did you do?" The letter answered me. "I have transferred all my businesses, properties, and financial assets into a trust, listing you as the sole primary beneficiary." My pulse hammered. I felt lightheaded, gripping the edge of the table to stay grounded. "You may choose to keep, donate, or dismantle it. It is yours because your heart has never changed, even when the people around you did." I moved to the final paragraph. "As for Daniel, I do not hate him, but I refuse to reward a man who spits at the hands that raised him. His inheritance is specified clearly in the trust. $15, the same amount he once laughed at when you tipped a waitress for her hard work." I felt as if something inside me caved in. Not triumph, not validation, just a deep ache. The next line was the final one. Give him the opportunity to learn that respect is worth more than wealth. Whether he takes it is his choice, not yours. I sat back, numb. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. My tea had gone cold. The room felt too still, like even the air had stopped moving. I whispered into the empty room, "Michael, why me?" The answer wasn't in the letter. It was already inside me. Daniel never resented poverty. He resented humility. He resented the idea that a person could live without being admired. He resented that I didn't crave applause. He resented that I didn't chase status for him to brag about. And in that resentment, he convinced himself he had been deprived. The legal document remained unopened on the table. Finally, I forced myself to unfold it. Trust beneficiary, Henry Carter, sole primary beneficiary. Date, notarized 6 months before death. Financial and physical holdings listed in detail across attached documents. Dozens of legal terms filled the page. Real estate portfolios, business ownership percentages, investment accounts. Numbers bigger than anything I'd seen in my life. It didn't feel real. Not in my kitchen with scuffed tiles and a crooked cabinet door that never shut right. With my calloused hands on paper that probably represented more wealth than the total of everything I'd ever earned. Beside the papers lay the USB drive, sealed with a tiny piece of tape. A note was taped to it in Michael's handwriting. For clarity, if ever needed. I pressed the bridge of my nose between my eyes and closed them. I wasn't angry. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't proud. I just felt tired. Because this wasn't victory. It was confirmation of something I had dreaded for years. That Daniel's hatred toward me wasn't caused by money or circumstance. It was caused by who I was. By being a man who didn't hunger for status. By believing love was enough. By thinking humility would be respected. I sat there for a long time, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I ran my thumb along the edge of Laura's photo frame on the table beside me. "What would you say?" I asked her picture softly. "Would you be proud? Or would you feel sorrow for him?" Of course, the room kept its silence. I folded the letter back into its envelope, carefully, like it was something fragile. Not because of what it said, but because of who it came from. Michael didn't give me wealth. He gave me clarity. And clarity hurts. I looked toward the doorway to the living room, my old armchair, the dim lamp, the faint echo of years lived simply. Nothing about my surroundings had changed. And yet everything had. Tomorrow, the will reading would reveal the truth. But tonight was the moment I understood it. This was never about inheritance. This was about recognizing the difference between a man who built his life on dignity and a man who built his identity on pride. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore.
The conference room felt even colder than it had the first time. The air vent hummed overhead, too quiet to notice unless you were already holding your breath. The chandelier hummed faintly. The wall clock ticked with unnatural volume, each second landing like a warning. Everyone was seated. Papers were stacked neatly in front of Richard Barnes. A polished pen rested beside them like a final verdict, waiting to be signed. Daniel sat closest to the head of the table, one arm hooked confidently around the back of his chair. He leaned back with a smile that said he had already won. Olivia sat at his side, diamond bracelet tapping lightly against her water glass. Tap, 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 like an impatient metronome. I sat near the opposite end of the table, hands folded in my lap. My cane rested against my knee. My breathing was slow, controlled, prepared. Richard cleared his throat. Thank you all for attending. This session will proceed with the official reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Michael James Carter. Please remain respectful throughout. The room shifted, everyone adjusting slightly, metal chair legs scraping softly. Daniel smirked. Let's get this show on the road. Richard ignored him and began. In accordance with Section A of the Estate Division, more legal terminology, numbers, and documentation. I barely heard the early allocations. A trust fund for charity, donations to a medical research foundation, a scholarship fund in Laura's name. Grace gasped quietly. She pressed her fingertips to her lips and looked at me with damp eyes. Then Richard turned a page. The slightest pause in his voice shifted the air. To my nephew, Daniel Carter. Daniel straightened proudly, blowing out a small breath as if preparing for applause. Richard continued, voice calm and crisp. I leave $15. Silence. Absolute silence. The clock ticked once, louder than anything else in the room. A gasp came from somewhere near the middle of the table. Olivia's face drained of color instantly, her mouth falling open. Daniel blinked, then again. No, that's a typo. 15,000, obviously. Richard didn't look up. No, $15. The phrase landed with dead simplicity. Daniel lurched forward in his chair. What are you talking about? That can't be right. Tell him, Dad. You know Uncle Michael wouldn't do this. Tell him. I didn't speak. Richard continued reading, not acknowledging the disruption. $15 being the amount Daniel once belittled when Henry tipped a waitress for her hard work. Mouths opened soundlessly around the room. A few relatives exchanged stunned glances. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Olivia whispered through clenched teeth, "Daniel, say something." Daniel slammed his palm on the table. This is ridiculous. Someone manipulated him. Someone poisoned his mind. My father must have said something. Richard lifted a hand and the room instantly quieted. There was no fraud. Mr. Carter completed psychological evaluation and independent legal review before signing this amendment. Daniel froze, his breath coming sharp through his nose. Then Richard continued, and the words felt like the air shifting again. To my brother, Henry Carter. Daniel whipped toward me, eyes wild. Richard read slowly, each syllable carved from steel. I leave all remaining assets and holdings, totaling $160 million. A wave of reaction rippled through the room. Gasps, chairs scraping. A relative dropped a pen. Whispering erupted like sparks in dry grass. Did he say $160 million? All of it? Henry? Olivia's bracelet hit her glass again, this time from her hand trembling uncontrollably. Tap, tap, tap. Then she snatched her hand back and tried to steady herself. Daniel shot to his feet. No, absolutely not. This cannot be legal. He was not in his right mind. There had to be coercion. Who talked to him? Who influenced him?
His voice escalated to a roar. "I'm his legacy. I'm the one who deserved it. I was supposed to get it. Everyone knows that. Everyone!" Richard didn't raise his voice. There was no fraud. Mr. Carter completed psychological evaluation and independent legal review before signing this amendment. Daniel pounded the table again, rattling the pens and glasses. "I'll sue. I swear to God I'll sue. This is fraud. This is theft. This is—" He turned to me, pointing a shaking finger so close to my face I could feel the heat of his anger. "You did this! You manipulated him! You poisoned him against me! You made him pity you! And you robbed me!" I met his eyes, calm, steady. "Sit down, Daniel," Olivia hissed under her breath, but he didn't hear her. He was spiraling, his voice breaking with rage. "All my life I worked to be seen, to be respected, and this is how I'm repaid? After everything I've done? After everything I deserve?" He choked on the last word, voice cracking like glass under pressure. People stared, not at me, not at Richard, but at Daniel. And maybe for the first time, he realized they weren't admiring him. They were witnessing him. Seeing every cruel word he had ever spoken reflected back to him in full. He looked around desperately, waiting for Olivia to defend him, for relatives to stand behind him, for someone to feed the delusion he had built his identity on. But no one did. Even Olivia leaned away from him, subtly but unmistakably, as if distancing herself from a sinking ship. Daniel turned back to me, eyes wild, voice shattering. "You should have stood up for me. You should have told him I deserved it. I'm your son. You were supposed to make sure I got what I earned." The room vibrated with tension. My heartbeat was calm, painfully calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand. I didn't flinch. I said one sentence. "Money didn't change Michael, Daniel. It changed you before you ever had it." Silence detonated across the room. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His knees buckled, and he dropped back into his chair. Olivia stared ahead numbly, fingers frozen on her lap. He whispered, barely audible, "No, no, no." His shoulders collapsed inward, as though the armor of arrogance he had spent a lifetime building had suddenly fallen away. Richard closed the folder quietly. "That concludes the will reading." Chairs scraped again, but not aggressively. Cautiously. People stood slowly, unsure whether to speak, whether to leave, whether to look at me or avoid my eyes entirely. No one congratulated me. No one pretended to understand what I felt. Because this was not victory. It was consequence. I didn't look at the papers. I didn't collect anything. I didn't shake hands. I didn't wait for reactions. I simply stood. The room went silent instantly. Even Daniel stopped breathing. I took my cane, stepped away from the table, and walked toward the door. No one moved until I reached it. The knob turned under my hand, cool metal, grounding. Before I stepped out, I heard a voice behind me, small, breaking. "Dad? Please?" I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing I could say in that room that would teach him what life had already begun teaching him. I walked out, and the silence I left behind was louder than Daniel's shouting had ever been. Word of the will reading didn't stay inside the conference room for long. Within 24 hours, Daniel had hired a lawyer and filed an objection, claiming manipulation, diminished mental state, and undue influence by an unaccomplished family member, his exact phrasing. The challenge was dismissed almost immediately. Richard told me over the phone, voice calm as always. Michael prepared for every possible dispute. Legally, there is no ground for contest. Daniel tried again 2 days later. Another lawyer, another rejection. By the end of the week, he had spoken to 3 law firms. By the end of the month, 7. They all turned him away. I heard most of this from Grace. I didn't ask for updates. She offered them anyway, her voice always carrying some mixture of disappointment and protective anger. "He still can't see what this is supposed to teach him," she said once. And I answered quietly, "He might not learn from it until life makes him." Then I ended the call, not unkindly, just tired. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It was slow, humiliating, inevitable. 2 weeks after the failed challenge, Olivia left. Not loudly, not with a screaming match or broken plates, but with silence. Daniel came home to an empty closet and a folded note on the kitchen counter. When Grace told me, I asked, "Does he blame me for that too?" She hesitated before answering. "He blames everyone." Daniel's world shrank quickly. Business acquaintances distanced themselves. Family members stopped answering his calls. His business ventures, once kept afloat by Michael's private funding and Olivia's networking, collapsed. Investors pulled out. Debts surfaced. He filed for bankruptcy. Someone mentioned he had begun drinking heavily. Someone else hinted he had been evicted. I listened, but didn't ask for more. Not because I didn't care, but because caring any deeper would have destroyed what little was left of me. I never gloated. I never defended myself. I never sent help quietly through third parties. For the first time in my life, I allowed consequences, real consequences, to take their course. It wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. I had spent a lifetime bleeding for others. Laura, Daniel, even my brother, though he never asked me to carry his success on my shoulders. I realized I had nothing left to give if I continued handing myself away. So I worked. Not with steel and fire anymore, but with Michael's legacy. I expanded his foundation, just like he'd always wanted to, but never had time for. Scholarships for single parents putting themselves through school. Job training for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. I met people who reminded me of the younger version of myself. Tired, trying, invisible, deserving. I funded the hospital wing that cared for Laura, anonymously. I stood in the lobby for the ribbon cutting, nobody knowing who I was except the administrator who shook my hand quietly and said, "Your wife would be proud." I nodded because speaking would have broken me open. The money never felt like mine. It always felt like Michael's final instruction. Take what you've lived and turn it into something that protects others. I did. Life became quieter after that. Not happier, just calmer. A soft kind of calm. Days filled themselves with manageable routines. Mornings on the porch, afternoons answering foundation emails, evenings cooking dinner alone. Sometimes I saw Daniel's name on caller ID. I didn't block him, but I didn't answer. Not yet, while he was still wounded enough to bite the hand that tried to help him. One night, months after the will reading, another storm rolled in, the kind that rattled my little house and soaked the world in gray. Rain tapped the living room windows like impatient fingers. Thunder rumbled distantly. I sat in my armchair, Laura's photograph in my hands. Her smile looked exactly the way I remembered, gentle, tired, warm enough to melt any winter. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. "I did everything I could," I said softly. "For him, for us." My voice shook. "This life, it didn't turn out how I imagined." A tear slid down my cheek before I even felt it forming. "I lost you too soon, and I lost him
Even earlier. I just didn't realize it. Saying it out loud hurt more than anything Daniel had ever said. Rain pattered harder. The storm outside felt like punctuation, heavy, relentless, honest. I don't hate him, I continued. I never did. I just don't know how to save someone who thinks love is failure. The room didn't answer, but something in me loosened, like grief finding a quiet place to rest. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting the storm do the talking for a while. The house creaked. Water traced its way down the glass. The air smelled faintly of old books and eucalyptus wood polish. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't broken. I was simply a man who had loved deeply, lost deeply, and finally understood that dignity doesn't win applause. It simply survives. I rested Laura's photograph in my lap and closed my eyes. Outside, the storm softened. Inside, my chest did too. Life would go on, and someday, maybe, when Daniel was done destroying himself in search of someone to blame, he might come back not for money, but for forgiveness. If that day ever came, my door would be unlocked. But for the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting at it. I was living. Quietly, calmly, exactly as the man Laura married.
9 months passed before I saw him again. It was a Saturday morning. Cool air, pale sunlight spilling across the porch, the smell of soil clinging to my hands from the garden. I'd just finished planting winter greens when I heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, hesitant. When I looked up, Daniel was standing a few feet away. He looked smaller, not physically, though he was thinner, but smaller in presence. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes tired and rimmed red. The arrogance that once filled every room he entered was gone. He stood like someone unsure whether he deserved to be standing anywhere at all. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. When he managed to speak, his voice cracked. "Dad, can I come in?" I didn't rush to answer. I didn't fold my arms or demand explanation. I simply nodded once and stepped aside. He walked inside slowly, like the floor might disappear beneath him if he moved too fast. He sat on the far edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the ground. I sat opposite him, not too close. The clock on the wall ticked gently. A breeze rattled a wind chime just outside the door. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I messed up." He didn't dress it in excuses, didn't blame anyone, didn't justify. Just 3 words, spoken with a pain that didn't need exaggeration. I waited. He swallowed, eyes filling. "I hurt you. I hurt Mom's memory. I hurt myself. I don't know how I let it get this bad." A tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. I thought success meant respect. I thought if people looked up to me, I'd feel whole. But I kept chasing more, and the more I got, the more I hated myself. None of it mattered. None of it filled anything. He shook his head. "And I blamed you because that was easier than blaming myself." His words were raw, not polished, not rehearsed. He wasn't performing. He was finally feeling. "I'm not here to ask for money. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And I don't expect forgiveness. I really don't." Silence again. He stared at the floor. I stared at him, this man who used to be a boy who wore baseball cleats and called me a hero every time I fixed his glove or tied his shoes too tight. That boy still existed somewhere inside the man across from me. But healing wasn't a switch someone could flip. I leaned forward slightly. My voice stayed calm. Not stern, not warm, just honest. What happened to you, son, didn't start with money. He looked up, slow, afraid. You were already hurting long before the estate. You thought love meant failing. You thought gentleness meant weakness. You learned to measure worth in applause because you didn't know how to measure it in character. He closed his eyes, shoulders trembling. I know. I took a careful breath. My voice stayed calm, not stern, not warm, just honest. I'm glad you came. I'm glad you said what you needed to say. But forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. And I need time. He nodded immediately. No protest, no argument. I'll wait. And if waiting is all I ever do, that's okay. He stood slowly, wiped nothing from his face, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, not expecting anything from me, just grounding himself. I said, "Take care of yourself, Daniel." He didn't sob, he didn't collapse, he didn't beg. He just whispered, "I'll try," and stepped out into the soft morning light. The months that followed were simple, peaceful in a way I hadn't known in years. I tended the garden daily, basil, spinach, tomatoes, lavender along the fence because Laura always loved the scent. I taught woodworking in the garage to neighborhood teenagers, kids who needed guidance more than lectures. The old workbench stayed dusty with sawdust instead of regret. Grace visited often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk about nothing important. Every time she left, she hugged me longer than she used to. Daniel checked in sometimes, a text now and then, a postcard once from a counseling retreat, not trying to force his way back in, just proving he wasn't giving up on himself. I didn't answer every message, but I read every one. Healing wasn't fast, but it was real. My life wasn't defined by inheritance or legacy or wealth. It was quiet, intentional, a second chance to breathe. On a rainy afternoon, much like the one months earlier, I sat in the living room with Laura's photo again. This time, I didn't ask questions. I didn't apologize. I just held the frame and watched the rain slide down the window like slow silver threads. I'm okay, I whispered to her picture. Finally. Because I was. Daniel might come back in full someday, or he might not, but I had stopped bleeding to earn someone's love. And once a man stops bleeding, he finally starts living.